Hello everyone. In this video I am going to explain flexible budget. Let's understand the basic concept of flexible budget. While preparing flexible budget we have to consider three types of cost. First one, variable cost. Variable cost, it is also known as variable expenses, or it is also known as variable overhead. These are the costs which change according to change in level of production. Means variable cost increase if the production increases. Variable cost increase if the production increases, and variable cost decrease if the production decreases. Variable cost is nil if there is no production. Suppose a manufacturer is manufacturing 500 units, 1000 units, or 2000 units. All are identical product. Now, suppose the per unit cost of material is equal to rupees 10. Now if the manufacturer produces 500 units, per unit cost of material that is rupees 10, and if we consider 1000 units, then also the per unit cost of material is rupees 10, and if we manufacture 2000 units, then also the per unit cost of material should be rupees 10. So in order to calculate amount is equal to per unit cost multiplied by units. It is also known as quantity. Means for 500 units amount is equal to 10 multiplied by 500, that is equal to rupees 5000, and for 1000 units amount is equal to 10 multiplied by 1000, that is equal to rupees 10,000, and for 2000 units amount is equal to 10 multiplied by 2000, that is equal to 20,000. Now what is the conclusion we can make? That is, in case of variable cost, per unit cost of material, labor, yeah, variable overhead remain constant, but amount vary. Amount will vary in case of variable cost. Now, second type of cost we consider, that is fixed cost. Fixed cost are those costs which does not change according to change in level of production. For example, suppose a manufacturer, he has taken a factory for rent for rupees, he is paying rent 50,000. This is the rent. Now whatever may be the level of production, suppose he is manufacturing 500 units, or he is manufacturing 10,000 units, or he is manufacturing 2000 units. whatever may be the level of production, he or she has to pay the same rent. So in case of fixed cost, amount remain constant. So we calculate per unit cost. Per unit cost is equal to amount upon quantity. It is also known as units. Means for 500 units, per unit cost is equal to 50,000 upon 500. And for 10,000 unit, amount is per unit is equal to 50,000 upon 10,000. And for 2,000 unit, 50,000 upon 2,000 units. So we can make the conclusion that in case of fixed cost, amount remain constant and per unit cost will vary. So the another type of cost is semi variable expenses. Semi variable expenses are those expenses a cost which are partially fixed and partially fixed and partially variable. Partially fixed and partially variable. So for example, electricity bill. Here we have to pay the fixed amount whether we consume electricity or not. And after that fixed charges, the charges may increase according to the consumption. So semi-variable expenses, if any expenses with fixed or variable proportion, if it is given in the question, that comes under semi-variable expenses. Now we come to the solution. Here we have to draw up a flexible budget for overhead expenses on the basis of the following data and determine the overhead rate at 70%, 80% and 90% capacity. Information is given for 80% capacity. These two are not given. So we have to calculate this. So first information is given variable overhead. Variable overhead are variable cost that change according to change in level of production. So we prepare this table. Here we write capacity level, capacity levels according to the question. What are the level of capacity? 70, 80 and 90. So we write it here 70%, 80% and 90% capacity. Here we write particulars. And here this heading we write it here flexible budget. So according to the question, first information is variable overhead. So first we write it here variable overhead. Variable under variable overhead there are two items are given. So we write it there. First one indirect labor. So in this table we write it here indirect labor. So indirect labor for 80% capacity is given, that is equal to 12,000. So how to calculate for 70 as well as 90? So we have to make the working note. Here for 70% capacity we don't know. But for 80% capacity, we know that is equal to 12,000. So we follow simple cross multiplication. So for 70% capacity, amount is equal to 12,000 multiplied by 70% upon 80%. Percent कट सकते हैं 0 then that is equal to 12,000 into 7 upon 8, that is equal to 10,500. So we write it in this table 10,500. And next, for 90% capacity, we know the value of 80% capacity, that is equal to 12,000. Now how to calculate for 90% capacity? So simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 12,000 multiplied by 90% upon 80%. Percent कट सकते हैं 0 then that is equal to 12,000 multiplied by 9 upon 8 is equal to 13,500. So we write it in the main table, that is equal to 13,500. And next item in case of variable overhead, next one, indirect material. Indirect material for 80% capacity, that is given in the question, that is equal to, so we write it here, indirect material for 80% capacity is equal to 4,000. Now we have to calculate for 70 as well as 90% capacity. So we calculate 80% capacity, we know the value, that is equal to 4,000. So how to calculate for 70% capacity? Cross multiplication, simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 4,000 multiplied by 70% upon 80%, that is equal to 3,500. And same for we calculate for 80% capacity, we know the answer, that is equal to 4,000. So how to calculate for 90% capacity? Simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 4,000 multiplied by 90% upon 80%. Percent कट कर सकते, then 0 then that is equal to 4,500. So we write it there 3,500 and 4,500. 3,500 and 4,500. Now only there are two items under variable overhead, so we can write it here, total variable overhead, that is equal to, that is our A part. So A part answer, that is equal to 10,500 plus 3,500, that is equal to 14,000. 12,000 plus 4,000 is equal to 16,000. And 13,500 plus 4,500, that is equal to 18,000. This is our A part. Now after variable overhead, the information is given for semi-variable overhead. So we have to give the heading semi-variable overhead. Under semi-variable overhead, there are two items are given. First one, power. So here we have to write first heading, power. Now we have to remember first point, if any expenses with fixed or variable proportion या percentage if it is given, then it is an adjustment. So we have to do the calculation in working note. So we write it there, power, here we have to make the working note, power, it is given 30% fixed, 30% fixed, so we write it here 30% fixed. remaining part is 70% means variable. So according to the question, power amount is equal to 20,000. Amount is equal to 20,000. So we have to distribute this 20,000 according to this ratio, that is 20,000 multiplied by 30% and 20,000 multiplied by 70%. So 20,000 multiplied by 30% is equal to 6,000 and 20,000 multiplied by 7,000 70% is equal to 14,000. Now, what is the rule? In case of fixed cost or fixed expenses, amount remain constant. But in case of variable, amount will change according to change in level of production. So here we have to split this power into two category. One is fixed, second one variable. So fixed amount, that already we have calculated, fixed amount is equal to 6,000. So we write it for all the level 6,000 remain constant because fixed cost remain constant irrespective of level of production. Amount of fixed cost remain constant. But in case of variable expenses, we have already calculated 14,000 for 70% 80% capacity. So we write it here 80% capacity 14,000. Now we have to calculate for 70 as well as 90% capacity. Means 80% capacity we know the value 14,000. Now how to calculate for 70% capacity? Simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 14,000 multiplied by 70% upon 80%, that is equal to 12,250. So we write it in this table. Here we have to write 12,250. And same calculation we have to do for 90% also. So we know the answer of 80% capacity is equal to 14,000. How to calculate for 90% capacity? Simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 14,000 multiplied by 90% upon 80%, that is equal to 15,750. So we write it in this table 15,750. And after that, according to the question, next expense is given repair and maintenance. Again variable proportion is given, then it is an adjustment. So we continue with this table in the next page. Here we have to write repair and maintenance. Repair and maintenance, that is we have to split it into fixed as well as variable. So there are three capacity level, 70%, 80% as well as 90%. So we have to do the working note. Repair maintenance is given 2,000, 40% variable means, so we make the working note repair and maintenance. Amount is given, amount is equal to 2,000 and categorization is given 40% variable. 40% variable means 60% is fixed. So amount is 2,000, so we have to segregate it into fixed and variable. So 2,000 multiplied by 40%, that is variable, and 2,000 multiplied by 60% is fixed, that is equal to 2000 into 40 upon 100, that is equal to 800, and 2000 into 60 upon 100, that is equal to 1200. And what is the rule of fixed cost? Fixed cost, in case of fixed cost, amount remain constant irrespective of level of production or capacity. But in case of variable cost, it will change according to change in level of production. So we write it in this table. Fixed portion, that is equal to 1200. Here also we write 1200. Here also we have to write 1200. In case of variable, already we have calculated 800. Now we have to calculate for 70% as well as 80% capacity. Again we have to do the working note. For 80% capacity, we know the answer, that is equal to 800. Now how to calculate for 70% capacity? Simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 800 into 70% upon 80%, that is equal to 700. Same calculation for 90%. So 80% answer we know, that is 800. How to calculate for 90% capacity? Simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 800 multiplied by 90% upon 80%, that is equal to 900. So we write it in this table. For 70% capacity it is equal to 700, and for 90% capacity it is equal to 900. After writing all the semi-variable expenses, we have to calculate the total of semi-variable expenses. So second part we write it here, total of semi-variable expenses, that is our B part. Semi-variable expenses, that is our B part. So that is equal to, there are two semi-variable expenses. Earlier we have written power, then repair and maintenance. So total is equal to 6000 plus 1200 and 250 plus 1200 plus 700, that is equal to 20,150. And for 80% capacity, 6000 plus 14,000 plus 1200 plus 800, that is equal to 22,000. And for 90% capacity, that is equal to 6000 plus 15,750 plus 900 plus 1200, that is equal to 23,850. This is our B part. Next, after this, next category of overhead according to the question is fixed overhead. So we have to write it here, fixed overhead. Under fixed overhead there are different expenses are given. First one depreciation, second one insurance and salary. So we write it under this depreciation, next one insurance and salary. So fixed cost are those costs which which does not change according to change in level of production. So depreciation is given according to the question 11,000, 3,000 and 10,000. 11,000, 10,000, 3,000, then 10,000. So it remain constant. Here also we write 11,000, 11,000, 3,000, 3,000, 10,000. Here also 10,000. So the total of fixed cost, yeah, fixed overhead, that is our C part. So total fixed overhead, that is our C part. That is equal 11 plus 3 plus 10 is equal to 24,000. 24,000, 24,000. Here also 24,000. Now total cost is equal to A plus B plus C. A means total of variable overhead, B means total of semi-variable overhead expenses, C means total of fixed overhead, that is equal to A plus B plus C. So A part answer is equal to 14,000 plus 2150 plus 24,000, that is equal to 58,150. And for second part 62,000, and for third part 65,850. Now we have to calculate according to the question. It is written here, determine the overhead rate. So we have to calculate the overhead rate. Here it is given estimated direct labor hours. So estimated direct labor hours is given in hours. So for 80% capacity it is 1,24,000 hours. So we have to calculate for 70% as well as 90% capacity. So we write it here, estimated labor hours. Estimated labor hours for 80% capacity it is given 1,24,000 hours. So we have to calculate for 70 and 90, same calculation. For 80% capacity it is 1,24,000 hours. So how to calculate for 70% capacity? That is simple cross multiplication, that is equal to 1,24,000 multiplied by 70% upon 80%, that is equal to 1,08,500. And same calculation for 90% capacity, that is equal to 1,24,000 into 90% upon 80%, that is equal to 1,39,500. So we write it in this table. Here we write 1,08,500, and for 90% capacity 1,39,500. So actually we have to calculate the overhead rate. So we have to apply the formula, overhead rate is equal to total overheads upon estimated direct labor hours. So for 80% capacity, total overhead is equal to, total overhead is 58,150. So here we write 58,150 upon, sorry, for 80% capacity is 62,000. So here we write 62,000 upon 62,000 upon estimated direct labor hours 1,24,000 hours, and for 70% capacity, that is equal to 70% capacity 58,150 upon 1,08,500. 58,150 upon 1,08,500, and for 90% capacity, that is equal to total of 90% capacity is equal to 65,850, 65,850 upon 65,850 upon direct labor hours of 90% capacity is equal to upon direct labor hours is 1,39,500, 139,500, that is equal to, for 80% capacity the answer is equal to 0.5, and for 70% capacity answer is equal to 0.536, and for 90% capacity answer is equal to 0.472. Thanks for watching the video.